What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review The Boys in the Boat, based on the 2013 book of the same name by Daniel James Brown. The director responsible for this adaptation is George Clooney. And I had to double check his IMDb profile just to make sure, but I haven't seen any movie directed by George Clooney since Good Night and Good Luck back in 2005. I don't feel like I've been like willfully or deliberately avoiding his directorial efforts, but that's just the way that the cookie crumbled. But if you're unfamiliar with the premise, here's the description ripped straight from Wikipedia. The nonfiction novel describes the University of Washington crew that represented the United States in the men's 8 at the 1936 Summer Olympic Games in Berlin, including the coaches, boat builder George Pacock, and the working-class student athletes involved, especially rower Joe Rance, who was effectively abandoned by his family and left to fend for himself at a young age. And I must admit that I get very tongue-tied when discussing crew, and I had to call my dad before doing this review because my dad actually rowed in college and or was on the crew team. When people discuss crew, they don't even know how to use like the words, myself included. And so you got to be very specific in the way you describe being part of the crew team. So yeah, my dad rowed in college at the University of Virginia back in the late 60s, and I've seen pictures from that era. I mean, he was enormous when he was on the when he was rowing, and my freshman year potluck roommate at University of Virginia was also on the crew team, and I used to feel like this deep swell of pity for him, or a lot of guilt, because I'd be coming in from fratland shenanigans, puking my guts out and acting like a maniac like at 3 or 4 in the morning, right around the time where my roommate would be getting up to go to practice, because they would do their entire practice before going to class. And so he would be puking at practice, I'd be puking back in the dorm room for very different reasons. But I have nothing but the utmost respect and admiration for people who are willing to endure just the physical hardship and just the pain and misery of rowing in college. And this movie does a really good job of capturing all that pain and misery and all the blisters and all the sacrifices that have to be made. But compounding all that is the fact that we're in the middle of the Great Depression. I mean, the central character in this movie, he's quite literally living out of like a rusted out, like burned out old car. He's homeless. He was abandoned by his family when he was about 14 years old. They basically said, look, or his father basically told him, look, when I was 14, I was going off to war. You can take care of yourself now. And so food is in short supply, and he's basically paying his own way through college through odd jobs. And that's how he initially discovers he's been rowing for the University of Washington, because they promise you room and board and a little bit of money, and that'll be enough to cover his expenses as a student. And I would say on the whole, actor Calum Turner does a pretty good job as Joe Rance. He's very tall, very strong, very stoic. He does the strong silent type routine really, really well. And I would say Joel Edgerton as his coach, Coach Al Ulbrichtson, I would say he's very solid. Maybe not his finest performance. Actually, definitely not his finest performance. Like, as I was watching, I kept thinking to myself, what if George Clooney were playing this role? And I get it. George Clooney wants to be a filmmaker now. He doesn't want to be a movie star, but this is the kind of like inspirational, tough love coach role that George Clooney is the perfect age to play. But much like the sport being portrayed in the movie, there's no stand-up performance that kind of dominates the movie. Everybody has to learn to row as one. And this is an ensemble cast flick. And there are a bunch of other good actors in here. Like Hadley Robinson is absolutely adorable as the love interest. I mean, just her positive energy and her beauty and just her vitality just comes off of her in waves, and she definitely is absolutely incredible in this. And everybody's favorite sexy mom from Cobra Kai, Courtney Hengler, she's in here playing the character, or playing the wife of Joel Edgerton's character. But honestly, the biggest stand-up performance in this movie is that by Luke Slattery, who plays the coxswain. I just got off the phone with my dad, and I'm still a little iffy on some of the pronunciation and some of the terminology. But Coxswain, that is the role of the guy on the boat, who basically calls out the rhythm, like how many strokes per minute the crew needs to do. Because if the crew doesn't all row in unison, then the boat doesn't go anywhere. So sometimes you're going, at a slow kind of like warm-up pace of 25 strokes per minute. Sometimes you get as high as 40 when you're really trying to, get ahead of the boat beside you. But he's absolutely incredible, because while he's calling out like the rhythm for the team, he's also talking shit to the other boats or giving little inspirational bits of dialogue to some of the people on the boat, because the main character in that, he is kind of the strong, silent type who just kind of watches and observes and gets to look like the big hunk of a man. you need some other people in the movie that are actually going to talk and, make the movie kind of hum. But the big question is, should everybody rush out and see this on Christmas Day, or is it just going to get swallowed by all the competition? Because right now, whether you're talking about blockbusters or prestige films or foreign films, the next couple of weeks are incredibly competitive. And if your movie doesn't have something like doesn't have that really extra special ingredient, it can just vanish. It can just get eaten alive by all the other movies out there. And I would say if you love inspirational team sports movies, this is definitely worth a look. When it comes to team sports movies, I lean much more towards like the comedic ones, or kind of the rough and nasty ones. Like a perfect example would be Slapshot and North Dallas 40, both of which were written by the same author. Hang on, let me look up her name real quick. Screenwriter back in the 1970s by the name of Nancy Dowd. She excelled at writing kind of really rough, brutish, like really just like sleazy sports movies in a lot of ways. But Slapshot and North Dallas 40, I think those are two of the most entertaining sports movies ever made. But if your taste in sports movies is much more like Hoosiers and things like that, where you get to see triumph of a tragedy, or a bunch of people who are doomed to fail rise into the occasion and beating teams that are have much better resources or much better kind of legacy in the sport, well, then this is going to be the sports movie for you. Because in the context of this movie, at the time this story takes place, the University of Washington is not supposed to be able to compete with all the other big teams that have a big history with this sport. I mean, a lot of New England teams at this time, like Harvard and Yale, those are the teams to beat. They have a ton of history with the sport, and they've got the resources for the boats, the uniforms, the travel, etc. I mean, just like going over to compete in the Olympic Games, it's expensive. And that is the kind of the goal or the object of this story, because not only is the team, or not only is the University of Washington rising to the occasion and beating other universities in America, but eventually there's a regatta where whoever wins the regatta is going to represent the United States in the 1936 Olympics, where, if you don't know your history, took place in Berlin, Hitler in attendance. I mean, this is when Jesse Owens proved to be the fastest man in the world. It was a big moment in sports, a big moment in politics, and obviously a lot of the countries involved in the 1936 Olympics would be involved in a very big shooting war in the not-so-distant future. So to have this little team from the University of Washington, the junior squad, not even the senior squad, the junior squad, rising to the occasion and going over and mopping the floor with France, Germany, the UK, all these other big countries, it's incredibly inspiring stuff. And as I was watching it, I was keeping a little mental tally in my head and how many times it gave me like the chills, the feels, like the kind of misty-eyed emotion that you expect to feel when watching an inspirational sports drama. Now, for me, it was 3. And I'm not the target audience for a movie about crew. I'm not the target audience for these kind of, inspirational, uplifting sports dramas. So if it was getting to me, people who are much more into team sports, perhaps it'll have even more of a disproportionate impact on them. But it's tough to know, because in a lot of ways, this movie feels like a dad movie, or even like a granddad movie. But who knows? At this point, it might even be a great granddad movie, because both of my grandfathers, who were alive in the 30s, they have both now pushed on. They probably would have liked this. But even if you really love sports movies, there's a lot about this particular movie that feels very retro. I feel like these kinds of movies, like the style, the tone, the look, the music, it felt a little bit like a 90s movie, a movie like Rudy or something along those lines. And I've never really cared for Rudy, and I know I have a lot of brothers who would beat the snot out of me for besmirching the good name of Rudy. I don't care about football, and so I'm not the target audience for Rudy at all. But when it comes to crew, not a lot of people participate in the sport or watch it or even know what the fuck it is. So I guess, like, can it capture the kind of audience that a movie like Chariots of Fire did back in the 1980s? And Chariots of Fire, I think that was tackling the Olympics of like the late teens or early 1920s. But it helped that it had that pulse-pounding synth score that immediately became a giant hit in the early 80s. So that definitely helped propel Chariots of Fire to greater heights. But I feel like if you like movies like Chariots of Fire, The Boys in the Boat is going to be right up your alley. But from a filmmaking standpoint, this movie provided an interesting challenge for George Clooney as a director, because how do you want to film and stage the regattas where they can provide a little kind of anxiety and then a little suspense, then a little excitement, and then a little exhilaration when the good guys or our team inevitably prevails, because there's one regatta after another, and it can get really repetitive if you don't find an interesting way to kind of stage them or make them feel separate or unique or interesting. So usually each one will have like its own unique challenge, like a member of the crew getting sick or something like that, or perhaps getting screwed out of like a good slot, because once you get going, like certain races on certain rivers, it's more advantageous to be positioned in certain spots on the river. But if you wanted to criticize this movie, you could say that it starts to feel a little repetitive over time, watching these teams just, rowing in a straight line. And what makes, I guess, like our boys or like the team we're rooting for different is that they're slow starters and they come on strong at the end. And usually you'll start with like 25 strokes per minute as you're trying to get up to speed. And by the end, they'll usually crank it up to about 40 strokes per minute. And it is really exciting when you're watching them slowly but surely overcoming another team. And they're rowing like crazy and going like, like rowing like madmen. And George Clooney's whipping out every single trick in the book, cutting away to the coaches watching in anticipation, getting excited or stressed out, or cutting away to people listening on the radio and like ranting and raving and screaming and that sort of thing. But by the end of the movie, I did feel a little bit like the kind of the structure of the races was starting to run out of gas, because we've already seen all their family and friends getting excited and screaming and crying when they win. But as a creative exercise in terms of staging these races, the suspense, the excitement, the joy, the thrill of victory and that sort of thing, I think George Clooney more or less pulled it off. It's just hard for me to give this movie a full-throated recommendation, because old-fashioned inspirational sports movies, I would say the audience for that is niche. Like if it were a basketball team, like a high school basketball team or a high school football team in 2023, then it'd be much easier to make a full-throated recommendation, because it's just going to have much more relevance. This is one of those movies that a lot of kids are going to be like, they're going to go over to visit their grandparents and they're going to be forced to watch this. Like, no, I don't want to watch The Boys in the Boat again. Like, it's going to be one of those kinds of movies, because overall it's going for a very classic, very wholesome, very uplifting atmosphere. But for me, when it comes to sports and sports entertainment, I like a little bit of sleaze. I mean, I think one of the reasons that that show Friday Night Lights did so well back in the day was that it showed the hell raising. It showed, all the athletes getting it on with all the hot chicks and drinking and so on and so forth. This movie really turns a blind eye to, or just totally ignores all. I don't even know if there was hell raising, but the way the athletes celebrate in this movie versus something more contemporary, it's like they go to the dance and they're dancing to old-fashioned music with excellent manners, and maybe you sneak back to the girls' dormitory for some very wholesome hand-holding and like a kiss on the cheek. But this movie could have used perhaps a little more sizzle just so it doesn't feel quite so wholesome, quite so old-fashioned. That said, the people who love this book, and I have not read the book, and the people who love this story, once again, 1936 Olympics, they probably don't want a big sleaze factor involved in the movie, but I'm skeptical this movie is going to find a giant audience, but who the hell knows? It's been quite a while since we've seen a cool, inspirational team sports movie, so maybe there's an audience out there just like waiting for and craving this kind of experience. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I am by no means the target audience for this, because I don't watch a lot of team sports. I actually don't watch any team sports. I watch MMA, and that's it. But I have brothers who all they do is watch team sports year round. They are fucking fanatics. So the question is whether or not The Boys in the Boat can kind of cross over. Like if you only watch hockey, or if you only watch soccer, or if you only watch basketball, are you willing to kind of venture outside of your normal lane and watch an inspirational sports movie about a sport that you have no history with? Who the hell knows? We'll find out on Christmas Day. But also, this movie is going to get released on Amazon. The model that Amazon used to judge whether or not a movie is a success is totally different from a more traditional studio like Universal or Disney or Warner Brothers Discovery. I heard a fascinating line recently attributed to Jeff Bezos, and I'm going to get the wording a little off, but he basically said, like, we acquire movies and make movies and or shows in order to sell shoes. What they want is for you to go over to the Prime Video platform, watch a show, watch a movie, and then buy toilet paper or vitamins, whatever else the case might be, which I guess is an old-fashioned entertainment model where you create entertainment in order to sell other products. Obviously, movies do not have ads during the movie, But that is what they're trying to do. They're trying to get you over to the platform to spend some money. So I don't know how much money they spent on making The Boys in the Boat or acquiring it. And I don't know how many tickets they are looking to sell. But if they're able to get enough positive reviews or enough attention or enough visibility to lure people over to their platform to do some shopping, Amazon very well might chalk this up as a win. And as far as George Clooney's aspirations as a director are concerned, I probably enjoyed Good Night and Good Luck more than this, just because it was shot in that striking black and white, and also it's just about a topic that I was much more inclined to be interested in. But George Clooney at this point, how old is George Clooney? I would guess like mid-60s. He was born in 1961, so yeah, he is 62 years old now. He could easily direct movies for another 10, 15, 20 years if he chooses to. And if he's reached that kind of mature phase of his career where all he wants to do is direct dad movies and or granddad movies, more power to him. I'll show up and have a look. So I guess this is all a very long-winded, roundabout way of saying that I liked the movie. I didn't love the movie. I would recommend the movie if you see the trailer and you think it's like, right up your alley. Like, the trailer does an excellent job of capturing the flavor and the tone and the style and the approach of the movie. But it's definitely not going to be for everybody. If you're looking for a little more kind of electricity or vitality or shock value or just like more transgressive behavior in your entertainment, go see Poor Things. This is a movie for people who are looking for old-fashioned, wholesome family entertainment, but family entertainment that will make you want to go out and get a fucking rock-solid workout in after watching it, because it is incredibly inspiring watching all these kind of lean, gaunt, half-starved people during the Great Depression just going all out, trying to compete against one another when all you've had is like some broth in the last 24 hours. But I'll be very curious to see how much box office this movie manages to generate, but I suspect that in a week or two, it will have generated a couple million at best, but I would love to be proven wrong. It'd be cool to see that there's an audience that's craving these kinds of movies, because it would mean more variety in the marketplace. I would love to see more, inspirational sports dramas being made, because we so rarely get one. And if more are getting made, the chances are much higher of getting a good one. But like I said before, my taste or my preferences when it comes to sports, it's much more like Slapshot, much more like North Dallas 40. If you want to see some rowdy, randy, kind of rancid sports movies from the 1970s, definitely hunt those down. They remain riveting entertainment. But thank you so much for watching this video. I greatly appreciate it. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell. But thanks again for watching. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.